She was walking down Main Street, the afternoon sun blazing, minding her own business. Then, a police cruiser slowed beside her. At first, she thought nothing of it, until the officer stepped out, eyes sharp, words dripping with accusation. Within moments, the calm sidewalk turned into a stage for humiliation. People stared. Phones came out. But what no one, not even the officer, realized was that this woman carried a past that could change everything. Because when you've been trained for battle, you don't just stand by. What happened next wasn't just self-defense, it was a lesson in justice. Her name was Danielle Harris, 32 years old, a decorated U.S. Marine veteran who had traded her combat boots for sneakers and a peaceful life in the city she grew up in. Most days were simple. She ran a small fitness studio, trained young women in self-defense, and cherished quiet evenings walking home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. On this particular afternoon, the air was warm, the sky a clear, endless blue. Danielle had just wrapped up a training session, her gym bag slung over her shoulder, earbuds playing her favorite playlist. She nodded to shop owners, exchanged smiles with neighbors, and felt, if only for a moment, that the world could be kind. But as she turned onto Main Street, something changed. The low rumble of a police cruiser echoed behind her. At first, she didn't think twice. Police cars passed here all the time. But the sound didn't fade. It grew closer, slower. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the tires on asphalt. In the reflection of a store window, she caught the unmistakable glint of a badge. The officer's eyes were locked on her. Danielle knew that look. She'd seen it before, overseas, on the faces of men who thought power was theirs to abuse. What she didn't know was that this encounter would test not just her training, but her patience, her dignity, and her very belief in justice. The cruiser pulled up alongside Danielle, its shadow stretching over her like a warning. A voice cut through the air, sharp, commanding. "Ma'am, stop right there." Her steps slowed, but she didn't turn around immediately. Years of military training had taught her to read the tone before reacting. This tone wasn't about safety. It was about control. When she faced him, the officer was already walking toward her, one hand resting on his holster, not drawn, but close enough to make a point. "Where are you headed?" he asked, eyes scanning her up and down as if searching for a reason to detain her. Danielle kept her voice even. "Just heading home." But his gaze lingered on her gym bag, then on her skin, then back to her face. "We've had reports," he said vaguely, "about someone matching your description. Suspicious activity in the area." Her stomach tightened. She knew what matching your description meant. It meant she was black. It meant she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, according to him. People on the sidewalk began to slow, pretending not to watch but stealing glances. A teenager held up a phone, recording. Danielle noticed, but the officer didn't. Or maybe he didn't care. He stepped closer. "Mind if I look inside your bag?" She straightened her posture, calm but unyielding. "Yes, I do mind." The air between them thickened. His jaw flexed. "I'm giving you a lawful order." She could feel her pulse quicken, not out of fear but out of restraint. She had the skill to disarm him in seconds. But she also knew what headlines could do to a black woman who fought back. Around them, the murmur of the crowd grew. Someone whispered, "Why's he bothering her?" The officer reached for the bag. Danielle took a slow breath. Her voice was low, but steady enough to cut through the noise. "You need to think very carefully about what you're about to do." And for the first time, his eyes flickered. Not with dominance, but to be with uncertainty. What he didn't know was that this was a fight he wasn't prepared to win. The officer's fingers curled tighter around Danielle's gym bag strap, his other hand twitching near his holster. "Ma'am, I won't ask again." The crowd shifted uneasily. The teenager's camera phone was now raised high, red light blinking. Someone whispered, "She didn't do anything." But the officer's focus was locked on her, as if the rest of the world had vanished. Danielle felt her heartbeat in her ears. She'd been in firefights where bullets tore through the air, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield in another country. This was her own street, her own city, and the enemy was wearing a badge. The officer yanked at her bag, hard enough to pull her forward. Instinct surged through her body, years of training snapping into place. Her hand shot up, locking onto his wrist. A sharp pivot, a calculated twist. He stumbled, eyes wide, as his balance broke. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The phone camera zoomed in. Danielle's voice was calm, but cut through the tension like steel. "You will take your hand off me, now." The officer's face flushed with rage. Whether from the pain in his wrist or the humiliation, she couldn't tell. He reached for his radio, but she tightened her hold just enough to keep him frozen without crossing the line. The silence was deafening. Even the traffic seemed to pause. All eyes were on the black woman standing her ground, the Marine who refused to be another silent statistic. For a split second, no one moved. Then, the officer's hand slowly released the bag. But in that moment, Danielle knew it wasn't over. Because when power feels threatened, it doesn't back down quietly. And the next move would decide everything. The officer's grip loosened completely, and for the first time since he stepped out of the cruiser, his eyes wavered. Maybe it was the cameras. Maybe it was the crowd. Or maybe it was the realization that the woman standing before him was not going to break. Danielle released his wrist, stepping back just enough to give him space, but not an inch of power. The street was utterly still, as though everyone knew they'd just witnessed something that cut deeper than an argument. The officer muttered something into his radio, then backed away. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a retreat, wrapped in the pretense of authority. Moments later, the cruiser rolled off, taillights fading into the afternoon glare. Danielle's body remained tense. The adrenaline was still flooding her system, the training still whispering to stay alert. But as the crowd began to disperse, she caught the eyes of a little girl holding her mother's hand on the sidewalk. The girl's face was a mix of awe and relief, as if she'd just seen living proof that standing your ground was possible. That moment stayed with Danielle far more than the confrontation itself, because this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about surviving an encounter that, for so many others, ends with cuffs, bruises, or worse. It was about sending a message, one that said you cannot strip away my humanity just because you have a badge. In the days that followed, the video spread online. People debated what had happened, some praising her restraint and bravery, others twisting the story to protect the officer's image. But for those who had lived through similar encounters, there was no debate. They knew the look in his eyes. They knew the risk in hers. This was not an isolated moment. It was part of a long, unbroken chain of incidents that stretch back generations, where black bodies are questioned, policed, and controlled in ways the law refuses to fully confront. Danielle went back to her life. She still walked Main Street, still ran her studio, but something in her had shifted. It wasn't fear. It was a deeper resolve. Because the truth is, for every recorded encounter, countless others go unseen, unshared, unspoken. And until the day those stories stop happening, we all have a choice. Be silent witnesses or be part of the change. The next time you see injustice unfolding, what will you do? Watch? Record? Walk away? Or will you stand your ground?